What was that? It's just popped up. Okay, there we go. I'm just waiting for a few people to come in.
Okay.
We'll go ahead and start the introduction. Let me share. I gotta share the live stream too. Um, to Telegram. Okay, here we go. Hello, everyone. This is Naturalism of Yahweh, aka Lord Natural, and this is the interview that I told you all about with Doctor Fatou. Did I say that correctly?
Fatu.
Fatou.
Fatu.
Fatou.
Mhm.
All right. I promised you all that I was gonna get the interview with her. Thanks to my brother Miko, he actually set this up, and it's a big shout out to him. Um, Basically, what's gonna happen today? She's gonna go over the evidence to, I believe, prove that the Black Americans are indigenous to this land. Um, we may show some things on the screen, but mainly everything will be audible. And hold on one second. Yes, go to YouTube. Go to YouTube. Everybody that's on TikTok right now, please go to YouTube. If you wish to see everything on the screen, you're gonna have to go to YouTube. All right. So yes, also Native Americans, Pan Africans, go over there as well. So this information is for everyone. I mean, she's gonna say some things I never heard of. I believe Miko shared some things with me dealing dealing with these evidence of proving that Black people are indigenous to America. So yes, go to YouTube. Go to YouTube. Just giving them a little minute to go over there right now. Okay, we got 9 people in so far. Yes, go to YouTube, everyone. This is the interview with Dr. Fatou. Okay, okay, everything's jumping up. Everyone, please go to YouTube. Go to YouTube. Okay, y'all about to reach 50 viewers on TikTok. Please go to YouTube, everyone. Okay, we almost had 20 people watching. Because if you wish to see everything that's going to be shown on the screen, you're going to have to go to YouTube. But if you don't and you just want it to be like a podcast, then okay, you can just stay over there on TikTok. And make sure when you get over there, make sure you subscribe as well. All right. So I want everybody to welcome Dr. Fatou. Hello, doctor.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. May you introduce yourself to everyone.
Um, I'm a physician and I have always been interested in since childhood in my mother's lineage. Some of your listening audience already familiar with that. My mom was from North Carolina and my dad was from Ghana. Both of them are not with me anymore. So, as a child growing up, I always had a natural interest in history and, pardon me, family history. So, that my dad actually was pretty good with his family history and saving old pictures, and he became the family historian before he passed on. So, I learned a lot about my dad's side, and I always felt a sort of emptiness on my mom's side because I did not have that long legacy. And I was not satisfied with that. And then also, it was very clear to me that these two sides of my family, they were very different. I mean, they were both black. I say that in quotes, but I can see that they were both different. And I remember as a child now getting books from the library on Southeast Native Americans, and I wasn't even 13 at the time, because this was from, I went to Catholic school, and this was the Catholic school library, and that's when I left Catholic school and went to high school. And my mom never spoke about it, but somehow or another, intuitively, I always felt that her people were linked to these people. That's why I do feel research, genealogy, and these things have a spiritual basis, because nobody taught me this. I didn't really have that family oral history that some of us do have. I really did not have that. And one time she asked me, "Why do you keep getting all these books on Indians?" She was very puzzled. And I stayed quiet, but inside of myself, I said, because I think somehow or another your family is linked to these people. But back then, I'm 53 now. Back then, we didn't have the information, the records, and things of that nature. So I really didn't have anything to work with. That was pure gut speaking to me. So fast forward, um, once the records became available, and I started doing the ancestry, not so much with the DNA, but just record keeping. And I was one that I always spoke to my mom's elders. I took down names, and this became very helpful, because once records became accessible on the internet, and I was able to start tracing back at least some of the lineage, then things started adding up. So before I started learning a lot of this stuff that's now presented on the internet from different groups, African Americans and Africans, and groups like that, I had already concluded that my family and the surrounding families were heavily mixed with indigenous people, and that was based on my research. Now, let me explain why. Because when I would meet roadblocks, it was a very distant cousin that said to me, "Bear in mind that some of the surnames that our people have belong to the indigenous tribes." He said Indian tribes. And when he said that, that's when my ability to penetrate those walls came about. Because then I started realizing some of the surnames in my family were linked to some of the tribes. And then I realized that there were a lot of the families that were interrelated. So again, before DNA and the knowledge that I have now, I had already known from my research that, hey, I looked at us still as an African people, because again, Pan-Africanism was at its height, but I was fully aware that we were highly intermixed with an indigenous people that was here. I was at least to that level. And then, of course, I joined the Facebook group African Americans Ain't Africans. And, I learned a lot, but there were still questions that needed to be answered, because now DNA tests were becoming more and more popular. And I liked the DNA tests, but the DNA tests were not adding up with my research and what I was being told. So it's not as if I did not believe the information, but I needed to know why the DNA test did not seem to reflect that. And no one was really able to answer this until I joined a group called what is it? You might know the name of the group, Genetic Trust. It's a group that's created by Tyrone Lewis Cannon. Now, once I met Tyrone Lewis Cannon, the DNA questions were finally answered. And so now I started to go even in different directions apart from his main research, which is actually the key research genetically that can prove, in fact, that we are indigenous. But then I went further and started studying other aspects of our DNA in addition to what he provided, and just doing reading in general and other traits and everything together. And I'm here today.
Hey, that was a very beautiful introduction, and a lot of us have similar backgrounds. For like myself, my grandmother always told me who I was, and my great grandmother told us who we was too. They actually told us our tribes. Um, it's I must admit, yes, during the COVID time, that's when I started to dive into who I was, because it wasn't nothing else better else to do during the time, because hey, we wasn't working. A lot of places was closed down. So hey, what else was there to do? Well, to search for who you truly was. So that's when I started to look into genealogy, and I started to, you know what I'm saying, tap into these census records, the Dawes rolls, the Baker's rolls,
Mm-hmm.
all those beautiful things, and I found out who I was. I even came across certain maps where there were Indian tribes that was labeled on these old maps, and my people lived in those certain areas for 100 plus years. So, and I learned that they didn't have no records past a certain point, like before 1760ish, before the baptismal records was
Mm-hmm.
introduced. My people was there for in certain areas in Virginia and Georgia, as far as Arkansas, before it became a state. When Arkansas was combined with Oklahoma at one point. Um, it was a lot of Indian tribes that I was finding um, relating to myself. I also found some things relating to Wales. I have Negroid, uh, a Negroid stock out there in Wales, whom I am a descendant of as well. Um,
Wells, Europe, right?
Wales, Europe. Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a Negro population out there, and they look similar to the Australian noise, but they got fluffy hair similar to the Fiji people. Um, and their heads is more, it's kind of oval like in a sense, but I'm related to those people as well out there.
Nice. Are they still there? Is there a population?
I don't know. I only found old photos of them. Like, I mean, not old photos, old drawings of them.
Nice.
Hmm. But other than that, I know there's more to my genealogy. I haven't found everything yet. If I can find something dealing with Africa, I would love it too, and I would embrace it wholeheartedly. But I haven't found that person that I can
Mm-hmm.
link myself to, so I can say, "Hey, I have this bloodline running through my veins as well." Um, but that's just about myself. Um, if you don't mind me asking, what tribes have you came across in your genealogy, if you have?
The Chickahominy, that would be very distant.
Mhm.
Through a third great grandmother on her paternal side, she was an Atkins, Adkins, which is a prominent surname among them. Um, I noticed that the my uncle, my mom's brother, I did his ancestry DNA. He had what they call an African American community, and it was oddly with Southern Maryland and Washington, D.C. And I started noticing the distant relatives from that region were out of the Piscataway Nation. And using triangulation technique, I figured out it was coming from a pair of my great great grandparents.
Mm.
And I'm still trying to figure out which one. So I know that I have distant ancestry with the Piscataway Nation as well. And I have not been able to pinpoint the tribes in North Carolina, but the region, because those so-called African American communities, by the way, and I have to give American Harris credit for that one. She did a video on that on YouTube, but she took it down. But it is actually quite accurate. Tyrone Lewis Cannon backed that up as well. Those African American communities are literally the same areas that your indigenous ancestors were in. So it's actually a good tool for your major tribal lineages, not all of them, but the major ones. So you will, for mine, it's definitely very Algonquian predominated. So I know that I descend from the Algonquian tribes in northeast North Carolina, and that region, based on the region in my research, that would be the Seton and the Machapunga people. And that's just based on using that information in my research. But in terms of actual genetic proof, it would be Piscataway, and genealogical proof, Chickahominy.
Okay, you said a couple of tribes I never even heard of before, but there is over 5,000 of them.
Oh yeah.
Maybe even more than that.
Oh
Hey,
yeah.
nah, either you got any questions for it before we get in depth into this conversation?
Oh no, no, I'm just listening right now.
All right. What about you, Miko Wolf? I think you still getting yourself situated over there.
Not at the moment. As the show progressed, then I probably will.
Okay. All right. Another question. Hold on. Let me go look at the other question I had before you start explaining your evidence. Etc. Okay. What is your thoughts on DNA sequencing?
I love it. I think it all supports our ancient lineage to this landmass.
Right. So can you go like just like a little bit in depth in it, or
Sure.
just a little? Or we can
Absolutely. The
keep going.
sequencing, is there a particular test you're referencing to? Because 23andMe does what they call a timeline. That's a very rudimentary type of DNA sequencing, but it still demonstrates our ancient roots here. And so for me, that's what sequencing is, where it basically takes your different ethnic contributions and it maps it out from the most ancient in your genome to the newest comer.
Right, right. So
And when you look at our people from North America's results, you will see invariably we just all about have the Southeast Asian, which is an Austronesian marker at the very bottom, along with the Southeast African. And then as you go up to the top, you start getting the Native American, which is, they are Asian migrants. But the Native American, which is what the Asian migrants are labeled, is not at the very bottom. And then if you go to the top of that, which is the most recent, that's when you start seeing the British, the Nigerian, and the Ghanaian, Senegambian. You may see Senegambian a little earlier. It depends on that person and their particular lineage. But in general, for the most part, we all have the Austronesian at the very bottom, along with the Southeast African, the Angolan, then the Native American, and then these other groups come in on the top because they are newer to our genome.
all I was muted. All right. So, what is your thoughts on Ancestry.com?
I like it. I like it. See, I like all of them, even though I think they are deceptive if you don't understand it. But in terms of the information that it gives, I like it. I like the fact that you have a wider, when people ask me, well, what test should I do? I tell pretty much everyone, do 23andMe. If I, the truth is, I like when people do a lot of the tests, because the more you do tests, the more you educate yourself and the more you have an understanding of it. But if someone says, well, no, I can only do two, I will tell them, do the Ancestry DNA and the 23andMe. The Ancestry DNA, of course, gives you access to the records, which you want, particularly those of us from North America. And also, they have a larger base of relations because they also include relatives down to 8 centimorgans length chromosome, whereas some of your actual relatives won't show up on your list of relations on 23andMe. Now, I like 23andMe for our people because it's more detailed in showing our Native American Asian marker and our Southeast Asian, which is an Austronesian marker. So it demonstrates the key finding that places us here from ancient times. If you want to look at the different European markers, Ancestry DNA is a little bit better, but you know.
All right. All right. So now that was great. Oh yeah, one more question dealing with the ancestry and 23andMe. One that only focuses on estimations. They are not reading their results correctly, isn't they?
I'm sorry, repeat your question for me.
Basically, let's just say one that just took their DNA test, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
get a results like such as you have 80% Nigerian,
Mm-hmm.
10% Benin, blah 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 blah.
Right.
Is that individual that's reading the results, is they reading it correctly?
Not really, because it's those percentages. I'll be straight with you, they're useless, because if you even look at the key that they give you, you will see that if they give you 20%, they will even tell you that can vary from 5% until to maybe 30%. In other words, they're really not sure.
Mm.
They're not confident themselves. They basically tell you those ranges. If they give you 5%, they'll even tell you that could be up to 15. That could be anywhere from 1 to 15. So the percentages also vary on the amount of individuals that participate in their reference population. So many population geneticists will even tell you that percentages are not really that important. What's most important is the presence of that DNA.
Right, right, right.
But of course, I think that the percentages are put there to fool our people and trick them.
All right.
I see these DNA tests as double-edged swords. If you understand it, then it proves you're indigenous. And if you don't understand it, then it furthers, your ignorance.
Right. The reason I asked that question is because a lot of Pan Africans will tell people that's claiming to have indigenous roots to go take a DNA test.
Yes, I know.
Right. And out of the two debates I had, they did that, and I further explained to them that uh, they base your percentage off a fraction of a percentage. Zero point, was it 0.1 or is it zero?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So
Uh-huh.
I tell them this in a very simple way that a child can understand. If you
Right.
make a fraction of a percentage on your test, is that a passing grade or is that a failing grade?
I'm going to give you an even better explanation,
Mm,
and it's going to be more than one. Okay, so just bear with me. Understand that the trick that's been played with our people is that they have us thinking that African DNA, and that's what I'm going to call it, okay? African DNA is exclusive to Africa and to the people who are melanated in the Americas. And geneticists have participated in perpetuating that lie by the creation of something called genetic communities. Okay, so if you've done ancestry DNA, or anybody in your listening audience, they will notice that they will get something called African American communities. All right. And it could be like North Carolina, Virginia border, East Louisiana, Texas, different ones, right? Now, what happens with other people, let's say Samoans? When a Samoan takes a genetic test, they will get maybe something like 90% Samoan and then maybe a little European because of the mixtures. Now, this is what geneticists know the average person doesn't understand to ask. What's inside the category of a Samoan? Do you know? See, you and I will not know, but the geneticist knows. And I've had the good fortune of talking to a geneticist who was honest enough to tell me, because his grandfather was part Hawaiian and he took an interest in studying the details of that DNA. And he told me that Polynesians have on average 20 to 25% African DNA, and it is primarily Bantu. Now, why is that not known? The reason it's not known is because that information is closed off in a genetic community called Samoan, Tahitian, Hawaiian, Fijian. So you and I will not have privy to see what's inside of that category. But what they have done with your DNA and my DNA is they have exposed what's inside of our genetic community. Does that make sense? So instead of saying that you are an indigenous American, the North Carolina, East North Carolina, whatever the territory is, primarily that your ancestors came from, what they did was they opened up your genetic community and they showed your percentages, which will be African DNA, which is the oldest DNA on the planet. But what they're not telling you is that that's not exclusive to you. That same DNA is found globally in anybody that has an ancient origin to the land. This is why Samoans and all of those people in the Pacific Islands have on average 20, and that is with Asian mixture, they have 20 to 25% the same African DNA, which is primarily of the Bantu type and a little bit of Nigerian. But we don't get to see that because they close it off in a genetic community, but expose what's inside yours. Now, does that make sense? And do you see the trickery of that?
Yeah, I see the trickery.
Right. So what happens is when a Pan-African says to you, well, let's do a DNA test, and then you get to see Cameroon, Congo, or Kenya at MyHeritage, wherever Bantu reference they're using or whatever they're doing, then they feel like, well, they have proven that you have no links to this land. Because what they're not able to see is that all of these people, including the people in the Philippines, Southeast Asia, all of those groups have a certain amount of African DNA, but you don't get to see it. For example, I have the DNA of a Lebanese man And I looked at it. When I uploaded it to GEDmatch, which is a um, third party test created by geneticists, if you looked at his secondary populations, which would be the minor percentages, which will really be the DNA that his ancestors had originally, you see Bantu, Lemba, Yoruba, Igbo. You see these populations. His primary genetic group is Druze Lebanese. That's a genetic community. And a genetic community is simply created by the same group of people in the same location who are intermixing among themselves for a period around 300 years. That creates a genetic community. So this is why North Africans who are in the cities who are more miscegenated, they will get these categories like Moroccan, Algerian. But what's inside of that? If you were to open up those categories, you will see Nigerian, Ghanaian, Senegambian, Malian, Kenyan, and all 4 genetic groups. And you will see Southern European and West Asian, which is the people out of the Levant area that we now call Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, who are primarily mixed with Turks and other invaders mixed with the original inhabitants. That DNA together with the indigenous African people of North Africa mixed for over 300 years creates a genetic community. The computer recognizes that genetic community that the individual belongs to because the geneticists went around the world and they created the category, and then it allocates that DNA to Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and in your case, African American communities, except they open up your category so you can see your breakdown, and it has the people confused, but they closed off their categories, so they're not looking at their African components. Do you see the trick in that? So it looks like the only people with African DNA are Africans below North Africa and so-called Caribbean people and African Americans. And that's to fit into the lie that we were brought from Africa to the Americas, when truth is that these geneticists know within the genetic communities all over the planet is different varying percentages of African DNA, because that DNA is global and it is simply the most ancient.
So basically, what I get my understanding is this is really relating to phenotype in a sense, isn't it?
Well, yes, because the people with the most original DNA will be the most melanated. Mm-hmm. And will have the frizziest hair.
And that's why they calling it the African DNA.
Right. When the truth is it's global. It's not even exclusive to Africa. And I know this word is not correct, but I will use it. The area that they call Bantu, which will be the area from the lower part of Nigeria, stretching across to Kenya and going down into South Africa, and including Madagascar, they call those areas Bantu. When you study genetics, you will learn that DNA that's in that area, we are closest to that DNA, okay? Not West Africa. Our DNA is closest to the Bantu people, and it is actually behind the Pygmies and the Khoisan. It is the older of the DNA. So when you look at our ancestral compositions, you will see, and you would need to upload your raw data to third-party tests so you can see this for yourself, because they won't tell you this on Ancestry or 23andMe, but if anybody plays with GEDmatches, they will notice, or other third-party tests outside of GEDmatch, they would notice that if you are so-called African American, you will notice that your first matches are to Bantu populations. And that is because the Bantu people are a very, very ancient people. I'm again using that word, knowing that it's not a term that people like, but it basically describes the type of DNA found in that region. But again, it was global. Otzi, who is a 5,000-year-old frozen mummy that was found in the Alps. You can Google Otzi, O-T-Z-I, for any of your listening audience that's interested. When you look at his ancestral composition on GEDmatch, and I have, you will see that his older part of his ancestral composition was primarily Biaka Pygmy and Bantu. So that type of DNA was everywhere. And you have something called the Mozambican gene. There's a genetic group called, a DNA study group called DNA Consultants. You can also look that up. The Mozambican gene, and Mozambique is in the Bantu area, I say that in quotes, has been found in the Navajo Indians, found in some so-called African Americans, found in Tibet. So when you start to study this, you realize this original DNA that they're calling African is just a marker of ancientness, being primordial, being the first on the land. It's not exclusive to Africa, and it is found globally. So I like when people think that I'm going to run from DNA. I want our people to become comfortable with it. And if anything, if you have an understanding of it, the DNA proves that we are the most ancient. It doesn't prove we are from Africa. It proves we are the most ancient. But if you believe we're the only ones that have that DNA, then it feels as if we belong somebody else based on, we belong somewhere else, pardon me. But now you know, and your listening audience knows, that same DNA is found all over the planet.
So what I'm understanding is really what we just dealing. For what I'm saying, well, our average person is really just dealing with terminology. But what I'm understanding is the word is really just a placeholder, but it's a marker to show that you are ancient to this world. I mean,
That's
to
correct.
whatever continent that you are. Everyone that is ancient will have what they call quote unquote African DNA. It's just a
Exactly.
placeholder for ancient DNA. That's
That's
what
right.
I'm interpreting.
That's right. It is a play on words, and that's well said. That's
Mm,
exactly what it is. It's not exclusive to Africa.
exactly. So that's bringing me to what my brother Miko said. Africa does not have the patent on the phenotype and don't have the patent on on the word, I guess, the African DNA, because all melanated people who are ancient has what you call, again, quote unquote, African, quote unquote, ancient DNA.
Exactly.
Okay.
And based on our genetic pattern, we are older than West Africans because
Yep.
when you take a look, now they keep saying we come from West Africa, but when you look at the ancestral composition of West Africans and you have it broken down, and I have, okay, what you see is that the older part of their origins goes back to the so-called Bantu areas and the Pygmies. So how can they be our predecessors when their predecessors are from has Bantu type DNA? And we are primarily of the Bantu type. I say that in quotes. You see my point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see it. I was just reading something today, and I got this little new entry to my YouTube channel called Newspaper Discoveries, where I dive into old newspapers from the 17th century on up. And I was reading something dealing with the pygmies uh that was in Tennessee, in the Tennessee area.
Mm-hmm.
Said that these pygmies, they found these skulls along with mongoloid skulls and negroid skulls and European skulls that predated the what they call it, quote unquote, before Christ,
Right.
Tennessee era,
Mm-hmm.
which showed that
We
it was
we
very.
had the Tennessee Pygmy Cemetery. They have thousands and thousands of skulls. I mean, pardon me, skeletons buried there. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. All right, man. You really just talk. You open my eyes on something, but I wish we can just call it ancient DNA. But we have a lot of ignorant people out here that would just take the word and just walk away with the word African and think that means you actually come from that continent, but they just really don't know. It's just it's really
Mm-hmm.
truly sad. It's truly sad, but everyone's not gonna get it, and everyone can't comprehend uh basically this information. That's why I sat here and I stayed quiet and I was really trying to understand it. And once you really put the nail in it, that's when I finally had got the true understanding of what you was mean or what you were saying. Because I'm not gonna lie, I was getting lost. Then all of a sudden I started to get understand once you start talking about when you start talking about Lebanon, the Lebanese people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, once you start talking about the intermixture up there, then I started, yeah, and you talking about the levels of to the oldest to the newest race. Then that's when I started to understand. All right. So, Mr. Non Ether, I know you got something to say now.
Nah, I mean, I was just like, you know what I'm saying? I was just like you. At first I was kind of like confused, but then I started getting it also, you know what I'm saying? And like the wordplay that they do, you
Right.
know.
Is there anything that I need to elaborate on or clarify?
Bantu, Bantu.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Can you expand on Bantu?
Okay. So when we say Bantu, we're referring to an area in the southern portion of the African continent that stretches from the lower part of Nigeria, Cameroon, stretching across, involving the Congo, Kenya, going all the way down to South America. We're not including the Khoisan people, or properly known as Kwe people. And it also includes Madagascar. These are various ethnicities with their own languages, but they share in common a similar type of genetic pattern. So they are referred to as Bantu people. And our DNA is most similar to theirs. That particular region, their DNA is older than West African DNA. It is not as old as pygmies and Khoisan or Sand people, but I would say it's right after them in terms of ancientness. And the reason why I said genetically we are older than West Africans, because West Africans themselves, when you map out their DNA, the older part of them becomes pygmy and Bantu. And yet that is our primary genetic composition in terms of its, characteristic. I'm not saying that's where we're from, but that is the DNA that is found all over the planet, along with the pygmies. So how can they be our predecessors if our genetic pattern is older than theirs, and the older part of them is of a Bantu-like type of DNA?
Right, I understand because you're. I'm looking at it like craniology. They got to use something ancient or let's just say, for example, they want to use a Gamboon. Well, I'll just use that when I had semi-debated Chris Harris. All right, basically, okay, a Negro skull was found in the Caribs, and it was dated to be to the 12th century. It was also found to have Indian apparel. The skeleton had an Indian apparel on it. Okay, for what I understand in craniology, to determine if one belonged to the Negro race, they use uh, basically a score from Africa to decide if a particular score from another country can match up in the measurements of the of this score. The way how you're explaining DNA, that's how I'm looking at it as they using something to determine if one is ancient and one and it's not. Am I don't know if I'm explaining it right, but that's just how I'm interpreting it in my mind. Like they just comparing, as you say.
I'm sorry, you kind of lost me.
Okay, all right. In craniology, do you know the study of craniology? I know you do, right?
A little bit, not a lot.
Okay, in craniology, they measure the scores, like
Mm-hmm.
top of the head, the nose, the eyes, socket, everything, the mouth, everything like that. So they compare our scores to African scores, and if they find a new ancient Negroid skull in America, they will compare it to an African skull to determine if it's Negroid, but
I
not
see.
okay. Yeah, that's what I meant. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at it in the same way as DNA for what you're explaining.
Mm-hmm.
They not calling us these people, but they are comparing us in a sense of relation. But they not saying that you are that.
You're right, because they are trying to force us to be those people and not respecting that we are our own people.
Right, right. Right. I'm glad we had this discussion. So I didn't know DNA. I mean, I know DNA was like that, but I didn't know it was actually just comparing. That's all it is. It's just
Mm-hmm.
okay. Now to your evidence to prove that black people are indigenous. I know if I can remember, it's something dealing with the mouth.
Well, in terms of, we're going to get to that in just a few minutes, but I'm going to tell you what proves where indigenous is DNA. And there's a characteristic that we have, which is the Austronesian markers. And this was a study done by Tyrone Lewis Cannon. As a matter of fact, your listening audience needs to write his name down and Google it. His dissenting opinion is right there. Absolutely everyone needs to read it. That's Tyrone, and then Lewis, Lewis, then Cannon, Cannon. All right. And what he's done studies on our people and using 23andMe. Okay. And he discovered that in a population, his reference panel was 300 and something participants. Okay. He discovered that 99.5% of us, that's almost 100, had a combination of Southeast Asian, which is the Austronesian, and with Native American, okay, who are the Asians that came in. With the Austronesian alone, it was 88%, okay? When you added the Native American, it came out to 99.5%. Now, I'm not a geneticist, but I will tell you, I have looked at sample upon sample upon sample upon sample, and I have to tell you, it is hard to find a so-called African American who does not have those markers. All right. It's just, I don't care. They will have it. And I will tell you an interesting feature that 23andMe has is called the 90% confidence versus the 50% confidence. And if anyone has a who participates in 23andMe, you can look at your results at the 50% level. It's automatically given at the 50% confidence level, but you can manually push the button up to 90% confidence level. And what you will notice, and this is something you can tell your friends who say, hey, go take the DNA test, something else. When you move it to the 90% confidence level for so-called African Americans, that Nigerian will often go down to 5%, 6%. The Ghanaian will go down to under 10%. And the main category of African that goes up is broadly West African. Broadly West African. It's not even really categorized or categorized as being a cross between Cameroonian, which we know is a type of Bantu people, I say that in quotes, and Mauritanian, which is a type of Berber people. Now, that's important. I'm gonna deal with that in a little bit. But what you will notice is that the European part of our DNA, which of course is based on the pale Europeans who participated and the similarity to their DNA, it also does not change. Now, when you look at our Southeast Asian markers and our Native American markers from 50% to 90%, it barely changes. The only thing that significantly changes is the percentage of Nigerian, Ghanaian, Senegambian, and West African DNA. Now, how is that? That I can move percent confidence from 50% to 90%, and no matter how tiny the Native American and the Austronesian markers are, they barely move. The European barely moves, but the African percentages go from 40% Nigerian down to 5%, 8%. Ghanaian is going down from 25% to 4%. What's going on? That goes to tell you that they are quite confident about the European DNA that you have. They're quite confident about the Austronesian DNA and the Native American DNA that you have, but they lost confidence in most of what they assigned you as African DNA. And that's right on 23andMe, with a feature your listening audience can use and prove.
So since it's so broad and they can't point you not even to a group of people, so that means they're being disingenuous, correct?
Exactly.
Mm. Yep, yep. The same thing. Like I would like to. I wonder. Oh, I see you, Miko. Hold on. Let me. I'm gonna share something in my Telegram. I wanna show you something. I'm gonna share the photos in my Telegram. Then I'm gonna share the screen so you can see it. Okay. And those results that Mr. Miko input. There we go. With those. Okay. I'm gonna bring up my Telegram. Share the screen. We go to the right group. Okay. All right, here we go. All right. And oops, wrong one. My bad. Here we go. Okay. On 23andMe, I mean not 23andMe. Uh, what's this? Ancestry.com. These
Mm-hmm.
are the people that took the test whom they said that I have close relation to,
Mm-hmm.
I guess. All right. You can see people in Mexico, close as Guatemala, even
Mm-hmm.
one in, I believe that's the Virgin Islands, not Puerto Rico, the Virgin Island.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on the next side, they go to one person I told you about that's in Wales.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at Africa, there's no relation whatsoever.
Right. I mean, I understand your what the point you're making. The only thing is that the argument that could be made for that is that that's due to the fact that not a lot of Africans are participating. More and more are starting to participate. So they can argue they just didn't get your relatives yet.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Although
wait.
I understand what you're saying, but we have so much evidence beyond even what I've said of our ancient roots here.
Oh, yeah, I believe you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing is, how, all right, they just comparing my DNA to people that I'm related to, but they
Mm-hmm.
just throw, again, like they're just being disingenuous. Like, for example, right here, say that
Nice.
the 35% Nigerian and 19
Mm-hmm.
basically mine. But when we go all the way down here, it got me as indigenous America,
Right, right.
uh,
Okay.
Bolivia and Peru, et cetera, et cetera. And there go that person.
Leave that up there. Okay. So when you start talking about the Moors coming into our bloodline,
Mm-hmm.
you look at Nigeria, Benin, Togo, Senegal, and Mali. Now, Ancestry DNA, now 23andMe doesn't include the Mali, but I'm going to tell you something. That Mali, that's ancient. We had pre-Columbian mixtures with pre-Islamic Berbers, and this is known. So we share DNA matching with North Africans, and unmixed North Africans have genetic compositions that are very similar to the people in Senegal and Mali. All right. So some of what you're looking at here is not based on anything recent. When you look at the Ivory Coast and Ghana, you will find that the people in North Africa, Moors, they also have a decent percentage of that, along with Nigeria and Benin Togo. So if you just look at some of even the more miscegenated North Africans, they will do this DNA test and they will post it. And then they will say, oh, I got 5% Nigeria. It's actually more. It's just that the rest of it is closed off in their genetic community called Morocco, Algeria, like I spoke of earlier. What you're catching is the little spillage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they're saying. Oh, I have 5% Nigerian. They actually have far more so-called African DNA inside their genetic community. Is just that you don't get to see it. Now, there's something called sequencing. It takes a little bit of practice, but the eye can be trained. I can almost guarantee you that Benin Togo that you have right there, that came in when the Moors came in from Europe, because Blackamoors were the main ones that were being enslaved and brought in, not from Africa, but the people that came in and mixed with our indigenous ancestors in terms of more recent times were the Blackamoors coming out of Europe.
Right.
The first ones were the Iberian Moors, who were the indentured servants that came in the 1600s. They were from England. They were from England, and they were descendants of Iberian Moors who ran into Great Britain during the time of the Inquisition. And London was filled with a whole lot of different people, and they were among them. They had a North African pattern, and they, which is Senegal Malian dominant, and they came from Great Britain into the colonies as indentured servants, and they were in the Virginia area in the 1600s. And when you look at Paul Heinig's work, for those who do genealogical research on the surnames, you will find these are the guys that have the last names like Chavis, Driggers, because Driggers is from Rodriguez, Chavis is from Chavez, Perry is from Pereira, and you will find that a lot of those surnames, Hayat, which is Arabic, a lot of those names were from those men that came into the colonies in the 1600s, and they were basically North African Moors. You will see that Benin Togo, you find that DNA more prominent in Northwest Europe. The Moors that were in Northwest Europe, I call those Anglo-Moors. They had more of a Yoruba type of DNA, which in ancestry, you will see manifested with the Benin Togo. So, and you can see also the Nigeria East Central. Now, if you look, if you scroll down, I'm going to show you something.
Oh no, this is just a screenshot.
Oh, that's a screenshot? Okay, my bad.
I can go to the real one. Just hold on, just give me a minute. Hold on. Let me stop the screen share and let me pull it up.
Because one of the things I'm going to show you, they have the where you can look at the chromosomes, the colors. Mm-hmm. I'm going to show you that indigenous Bolivia, Peru that you have, how much you want to bet that it's going to be adjacent to your Cameroon, Congo, or your Mali. And I could almost guarantee that some of your Benin Togo will be adjacent to the Wales and the Irish or the England. And that's called sequencing, because we inherited a great deal of that DNA with the cleansing out of the Moors from Europe. So anytime you see them attached, they will often be either by themselves on the chromosomes or attached to the European DNA, whether it's Irish, Scottish, Wales, or English.
All right, here we go.
You go down, no. You move down on the right. It's where it says color chromosome.
Color chromosome.
Yeah, go down. Mm-hmm. Yep, there you go. You click on that one. You see where chromosome painter. That's right. All right. So this is what you're going to do. Hit your, go down to your right. Okay. Stop right there. Okay. I'm going to show you something, how what I'm saying adds up. Hit your indigenous Americas, Bolivia, and Peru. Okay. Now, I want you to hit your Cameroon, Congo, and Western Bantu peoples. Okay. Now, click it again. Hit your Mali. Okay. Click that again. Hit your Nigerian. Okay, I knew one of them was going to light up. So in your case, and Miko, you know about this. Sometimes when you look at the indigenous, right? The indigenous is really the native, pardon me, it is the Native American DNA. This is the Asiatic DNA. This is not the original DNA. These are the people that came in 10,000 years ago, okay? So when they came here, they intermingled with us. When I use this feature, I will see that DNA adjacent and in the chromosome mixed with either Cameroon, Congo. Occasionally, I will see it mixed. You see how you have the green, the Nigerian, and your purple indigenous? You see that?
Yeah.
Right. That's a sign of a mixture. So it's like you inherited from a person at the same time, a mixture. The reason why you will see it with the Nigerian, with some of us, okay, majority of the times it will be mixed with the Mali or the Cameroon Congo, but in your case, the Nigerian, because when it comes to Nigerian DNA, which is they use Yoruba people as their representation. Yoruba DNA was here. It's not the most ancient, but they had colonies here. So you will look at a sample, I think it's called Campeche, right, Miko, on My True Ancestry, where we basically just about all match the Campeche ancient site in Mexico, and it was of a Yoruba type DNA because that DNA was here primarily in the Central American, Caribbean, and South American region. Yoruba DNA was here. So we all have a little bit of that DNA, and it has nothing to do with a slave trade. Nigerian DNA was here. So what you are seeing is that in your genome, you can look and see wherever these people intermingled with your ancient ancestors, they intermingled with the part of your lineage that was Yoruba. And let me tell you something, I'm not surprised because look where it is, South America. And that is where Yoruba people set up colonies in pre-Columbian times from the Central American area going down. So in other people, I will see indigenous North American, and I will often see it adjacent to the Cameroon Congo or Mali. In your case, I'm not surprised that it's with the Nigerian because look where it's from. That's where they mixed with your ancient ancestors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
Okay. Now, we're going to do something else. Click on your Benin Togo. Now, click on, I want you to get rid of, click on the indigenous and the Nigeria because we're going to get rid of those. Okay, now we're going to see something. I can almost promise you that Benin Togo is going to be mixed either with the England or your Wales.
All right, I click where, which one? I don't even see. Oh, there it is.
Yep, you can see some of them. You see that one? It's kind of hard to see on chromosome number 3.
Yep.
That means that that DNA came in and mixed with someone at that time. That's a mixed individual that came in with your English. Now, I want you to click the England and get rid of that. Go to your Wales. Okay, it doesn't show up there. You could click off that. I'm just curious. Norway, I rarely see anything next to Norway, but let's see. A little bit. A little bit. So what I'm showing is that when it comes to our Moorish DNA, you will see that a lot of it came when the Pale Europeans came because we were in their area. Do you understand? Or they were in our area, I should say, because we were there first. Get rid of the Norway.
With Norway.
And go up to Ivory Coast and Ghana. Okay, so if you notice on chromosome 7, you see the Benin, Togo, and the Ivory Coast together.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of pattern is very common with the Moors. They would generally have more than one African type. Berbers, North Africans, have a characteristic that we share with them. They will have more than one African group simultaneously. Now, what I want you to do is get rid of the Benin Togo, click on the Benin Togo, and click on the England. Okay, you see how some of them are together? You see that? If you look at chromosome 3 up at the top, that means you got that Benin Togo with the English. What it's showing, it shows the miscegenation that we received quite a deal of these markers through miscegenation, and they came in at the same time because they were coming from the same place, if that's making sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you go to chromosome 10 and 9, you see it there?
10 and 9. Yeah, it's right here.
Right.
Right, and I'm familiar with the Moors in my family. I actually found one they're called the Urquharts on my mother's side. And
Okay,
yeah, I'm familiar. I already know I had the Moors in my family.
we're going to click on the Nigerian East Central, right there, Nigerian East Central. Click that. Now click off Ivory Coast. Okay, none there. Now click off England. Go to Wales. Okay, so nobody mixed there. And this is a very rudimentary type of eyeballing that I'm doing. This is very rudimentary, but I actually use a sequencing app. And when you look at the sequencing app, what you see is that for many of us, that Ghanaian, Senegal, a lot of it came in during the whole period while they were all in England. And the reason why I know they were in England, because you will see that the DNA timestamp is all during the same period. So many of us have Romani Gypsy DNA. When you look at the detailed sequencing, that's when you see matches to Balkan, like Croatia, Greece, all around the same period, time-stamped around the same time that the Great Britain comes into the DNA. And also for many of us, we have South Asian matches to Pakistan and India. And for many of us, it is also time-stamped around the same period of Great Britain. So think about it. Where could we all gain that DNA around the same period? No other place but England, because during the 1600s, you had the Lascars who were there. There was a big population of Lascars because the British in the 1600s had started recruiting South Asian men and men from even Somalia and Southeast Asia to be navigators of their ship, because they could not go into these tropical areas and do their dirty goods. So they hired men who already was quite familiar with routes, how to navigate. That is exactly how they ran their empires. They used other melanated people to run it under their control. So England had a large amount of Lascars. You, at that time in the 1600s, you had a large amount of Romani Gypsies who tend to have DNA from Pakistan and DNA from Balkan areas of Europe. And you had a large population of Iberian Moors who had settled there, running from the Iberian Peninsula during the Inquisition. And of course, you had the Pale people, who are now termed British. So you had all these people living in this area, and this is exactly how we acquired that DNA, and also Ashkenazi Jews who had also run there as well. And then we wonder, well, why do I have matches to Croatia, Greece? What am I doing with DNA from Pakistan? What am I doing with a little bit of this South Asian DNA? And the funny thing about it, when you look at Paul Heinig's work, he will tell you that you had East Indian indentured servants, like the weavers, who were well known for being East Indians. And they tell you that these men that came into the colonies was from England. So where do you think the so-called African men that came into the colonies were from? And I'm going to tell you something else. When you look in the records and you see that these men, and I'm talking about the black ones, when you see that these men are suing their bond masters in the 1600s and going to the courts, do you really think an African man from the continent of Africa coming here on chains who does not speak English will learn in one lifetime how to navigate through a system which is British common law, or would that man be from Britain? So the truth is, that's where a lot of that West African DNA is coming from. When we get matches to Spain, Portugal, some of us notice we get tiny North African DNA. Let me tell your audience what that is. When you see some of your DNA relatives getting North African, remember, North African is a genetic community and is a recently created genetic community that includes people from North Africa who have Senegambian, Malian type DNA mixed with Southern European and West Asian, creating the genetic group called North African. And that in itself should tell you that the West African DNA had to come from a Northern Hemisphere area, Mediterranean area. The fact that you see these other genetic markers, such as North African, tiny North African, and Romani Gypsy, Pakistani, and things of that nature. That's why we have those types of markers. But the game that these companies play is that what they do is they will show some markers in your cousin for one, and then they don't show it for you, and they'll show India for one cousin 1%. They don't show it for the others. When the truth is, when you strip the DNA open and you look at it from third-party tests where they're not hiding certain percentages, but all percentages are available for you to see, you will see that pretty much we all have matches to North India, Balkan areas, North Africa in the modern sense of the modern North African, and the Iberian Peninsula. What Ancestry DNA does is that they, in 23andMe and your conventional test, is they choose not to report results that are under a certain percentage. And yet that percentage cutoff does not mean it's not significant. It's just something they choose not to do. So if you're under 2%, they're not going to report it. So to the layperson who looks at the results, it appears as if you don't have it, when the truth is it might be 1.8%, and that is still significant. And the question will be, why is it there and how did you get it? So that's why I encourage taking control, downloading your raw data, and using third-party tests, and not relying simply on the results that are given.
Right. I agree with you as well. Like, I mean, that could explain a lot where, I mean, if people claim to have Moorish background, you'll have to know where the Moors came from. A lot of them came from Africa. A lot of them came from Europe. A lot of them came from the Pacific islands, even Tartary. Sorry for my language, but they will have to know. They got to know that these Moors, they were going around mixing with a lot of people, and a lot of them had to become eunuchs as well. If people don't know anything about that, a lot of Moors was getting their snipped as well because of this situation, what they was doing, the mixing around. But I mean, a lot of us have different backgrounds. We're just not one. I'm saying this to the people, not to you, doctor, but people, we are a diverse people. You're not just indigenous. I said it many times. I told people of my Wales background. I told people of my Moorish background, and I told people of my indigenous background. But I said I know for sure I'm an ancient individual. Well, I'm a descendant of an ancient individual. But other than that, do Miko or Ether have anything to share before the doctor move on to the next phase of this interview?
Actually, yeah, I do. Before you do anything, I want to say this is a phenomenal show. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. The doctor's definitely cooking. But I want to ask you a question. Would you say that okay, the so-called sub-Saharan African DNA that we get on these tests, and then you have the next thing, which will be like, European, and then you'll get like Native American, Austronesian markers. Would you say that that would technically be an ancestry informative marker?
Yes.
Perfect.
Because when they give us matches to the lemba, like on the MDLP22 of GEDmatch, or using some other oracle like the MDLP16, and that's based on similarity, genetic similarity. It's not based on, we're not coming from Kenya. We're not coming from the Lemba tribe. It's a similarity that they're looking at. I personally think that it's not all ancestral informative markers. I think to categorize it as African is based on ancestral informative markers. But I think that DNA has progressed and become advanced enough where they are literally telling us the type of African, unquote, and quote, African DNA that our DNA is closest to. And I do think that that's more than ancestral informative markers. It really does resemble that DNA, just like the Hawaiians' African DNA resembles that DNA. Although, as a side note, I do understand that the Samoans, they do have an oral history that said that they migrated out of Southeast Africa. So, it's consistent with their genetic markers.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Doc. So would you like to move on? Hold on, wait a minute. Now you think you got anything to say?
Oh, nah, not right now. But I'm listening, man. I'm over here learning a lot, you know.
All right. All right. Now to the next phase of the interview. Then after that, I think it could be freestyled, and I guess we can um end the interview after this. So okay, so dealing with what Miko had told me about that you so he said something that you studied the Black Americans' mouths or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Let me give you a little background to that. One day, one of my patients came in for her physical, and she's from Jamaica. I have a lot of patients from the Caribbean. I would think in fact, I would say Caribbean people, in terms of lineage, make up the majority of my patient population. And she came in and she needed a physical. So, when I do a physical, I do head to toe. I even look in the mouth, and I get on their case if they're not, taking care of their teeth, if I see anything that looks rotten and stuff like that. So I was looking in her mouth, and I was focusing on her gums and teeth, but she went out of her way to point to the roof of her mouth, and I saw a ball, a bony ball in the roof of her mouth, pardon me. And she said, my dentist said to me that I must have Arawak ancestry because of this. And I said, really? She goes, yeah, he said that that's a marker of Arawak or Taino or some native ancestry from Jamaica, right? I said, oh, that's interesting. So, anyway, I finished the exam, and it just happens that I had a dental appointment soon after that. And in the process of taking my x-rays, it was quite painful for me to take my x-rays. So, they put the holders in there, and I have to keep, changing position while they're shooting x-rays. And I said, wow, this is painful. So the dental assistant said to me, rather the hygienist, she said to me, it's painful because you have all those tori in your mouth. I said, tori? So then she took the mirror and she said, you don't see that up there underneath your tongue and under the in the roof? Now, believe it or not, with my grown self, I never paid attention. I just assumed it was normal. It Those are tori. So I said to myself, wow, that's similar to what the Jamaican woman had. And I noticed every other Caribbean person, particularly the women, had these tori in the upper roof of their mouths. And I had one too. So now I started reading about it. And what it reads, and it's called tori, Tori. If it's singular, it's called Taurus. Taurus. Your audience needs to read about that. Google it. Okay, so what I found out is that it's primarily present in Asian populations. You can see it in Khoisan people. Let me just point that out. It's seen in Native Americans who are Asian derived. That's what it says. Okay. Now, I noticed this in a lot of my Caribbean patients, and I don't care what kind of phenotype they have. Okay. They would have it. I noticed it in some of my Puerto Rican patients, but really a lot in the Caribbean population. So I went to the literature, and I believe the name of the journal, it's called the Jamaican Journal of Dentistry. Don't quote me on the title, but it is a dental journal. And they did a study, and they found out that almost 50% of Jamaicans had it. So I found that very interesting. So I started discussing it, and a gentleman who's on Facebook, he mentioned to me, he's Caribbean, that have I noticed that my population has tooth shoveling, because he has tooth shoveling. And that's when my ears perked, because I remember reading years ago that tooth shoveling was something found in Native Americans. Now, back in those days, when I remember just reading that, I didn't have this knowledge. I didn't know anything about how people being indigenous and things like that. But I remember reading that. And with that, I read up on tooth shoveling, what it is, and how it looks. I looked at the different pictures, and I started looking back in my patient's mouth during their examinations. And not only was I looking at tori, I would tell you that the overwhelming majority of Afro Americans and Caribbean people have tooth shoveling, even if the tori are not present. Now, let me describe what tooth shoveling is. And I do have Africans that come to me, and majority do not have tooth shoveling. Okay. So let me just clear that up. And Caucasians. I have Caucasian patients as well. So when you talk about tooth shoveling, we're talking about the incisors. The incisors would be those two teeth in the top that, you know, Bugs Bunny always has those two large teeth. Those are incisors. Okay. And you have the incisors on the bottom. Okay. Now, the inner surface, for many people, it's flat. Okay. When you have shovel teeth, the inside of the tooth is cupped. Like you can literally take out that tooth and put some liquid and scoop it up. Whereas other populations, it's flat. The water or liquid just fall right off. There's different levels of shoveling, but it definitely looks like a shovel. It's folded and scooped. Overwhelmingly, our people have that genetic trait. And what's interesting is that if you look at an article that was done on the descendants of the Pequot natives who were taken to St. David's Island, there's a journal article, you guys can Google this. Pequot native descendants genetic studies on Pequot Native descendants taken to St. David's Island, which is a small island, but it belongs to Bermuda. They are still there. They still identify themselves as Pequot Native descendants. They have a very strong oral history. In the 1960s, the World Health Organization went to that island and they noticed something, that almost all of the children had tooth shoveling. Now, why is this important? Because this is what the article says. Because when they did genetic studies on these people who are known Pequot Native descendants, they had primarily African DNA. Their mitochondrial DNAs were in haplogroup L. Majority of their Y haplogroups was the E1B1A, which is found in 60% of so-called African American males and Caribbean males. And you also see it in African males. But the point I'm making is that the majority of their DNA autosomally and mitochondrially and patrilineally belongs to the African, quote, group. So the conclusion based on the WHO's findings of the children's teeth was that indeed these people were not lying. See, because what happened was their oral history was in question because it didn't line up with their DNA tests. And that sounds familiar because that's what's told to our people. But the conclusion of the article was that, in fact, based on the morphology of the teeth of their children, they had to be telling the truth because those teeth findings are found with Native Americans. So we can extrapolate that and say the same thing because guess what? It's not being said that's the majority of our people's teeth.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I have teeth like that. Like I always wondered about it too.
Now
You
you know.
I'm saying, but feel in the back of mine. I say, yeah, I got it too. I ain't even.
It's very, can I tell you something? It's an unusual person that does not have it. I don't even, I'll be straight with you guys. I don't even look for it anymore because it's like, you know, that's like looking and expecting the sun not to rise. I would be shocked if you don't have it. Now, this is something that I've personally observed. I observed that the round oral tori tends to be more in our Caribbean brothers and sisters. And I find that some of us, it depends, like people that tend to get the round ones from North America, they tend to be from that South Carolina region. These are just things I've noticed. And, you know, they have a lot of Caribbean lineage, especially from those coast areas, those Gullah people. I have a few of them that come to me and they have the round ones, just like the Caribbean people. But I've noticed that the people from North Carolina and those upper regions, they have those long toris in the roof of their mouth. It's not round. And I also noticed that I will see the North Americans with the submandibular tori. That's the bony projections in the bottom of the jaw. When you lift up your tongue, you get those bones sitting down there. See, I have that, and that's from my mother because before she passed, I looked in her mouth, and that's where I got it from. So there's some regional differences, but it's there. Not to mention another characteristic we have are the moles. Now, moles are found all over the planet, but you know, I grew up between two different people, and the physical differences between people here in America and Africa was very, very clear to me since childhood. This is what made some of the contributing factor that made me very curious about my mother's side. And I'm not talking skin color, I'm talking literal phenotype. My family, a lot of members have moles on their faces, and I wouldn't see this when I would go to Ghana or be around my relatives on my dad's side. And I'm not saying that none of them, particularly coastal Africans, can have a little bit, but nothing like Morgan Freeman and nothing like what I see on Caribbean people and on Southern people, like across the back. And it's very rare for me to see an African with it. I'm not saying it never happens, but when you do come across it, they tend to be from the coast. And that just kind of makes sense that, there's something else going on there from anybody from the coast. But that's a predominant feature in our people. And I tend to notice it.
So you talking about like skin tags, right?
Yeah, and they increase when you get older.
Okay.
Yeah, that's common in our people, but I'm gonna tell you something. I see it less in the state recognized tribes or people who come from free lines, and I see it more in my lineage that come from the enslaved line. So my conclusion is that it was heavier in the Caribbean, and we received it from primarily them, even though not exclusively. I only say that because I do notice that the people in the state tribes, they tend not to have the moles the way we do, and also the Northeast tribes, because they didn't face the same degree of enslavement that we did. And so even though, of course, from pre-Columbian times, we had trading with our people in the Caribbean and South America, of course, naturally, because of the intra-American slave trade where indigenous people were being transported, we got an extra hit of Caribbean blood, especially if you have enslaved lines. That's just a personal observation.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm like I said, I'm sitting up here been looking at this on my phone. It says it's rare in African. So let me screenshot this. It says it's rare in African, but Black Americans as a majority have this teeth shoveling thing. So this shows you that. Wow, I don't even want to say it.
You mean they actually admitted that tooth shoveling is found in Black Americans?
It said no. I'm saying right here. It says shovel shaped incisors are found in Native American and Asian populations, but are rare in those of African and European descent. But as what you're saying, they're found in Black Americans,
Yes, they are.
but
Uh,
it's rare in Africans.
that's right.
So it shows there's a difference between us. So
Exactly. Unless your Khoisan have it, according to what I read. But they didn't say we're from Khoisan people, right?
no, no, no. I'm still looking.
Mhm.
Find some type. I'm gonna have to find some type of article from a university on this. See, dealing with the Black American and his teeth shoveling. I can add it to my folder dealing with craniology. This was a great interview. I learned so much today, and I hope the audience learned a lot today. I hope if we could do sometime in the future, we could do this again.
Absolutely.
It's getting a bit late. Um, is there anything else you want to share?
Um, there's so much stuff. I don't know where to start with. Anything in particular of interest?
I don't have anything at the top of the head right now, but like I say, if there anything you want to give like a little detail to anything else before
Um,
close.
yes. Okay, on a more practical level, dealing with the sequencing for your audience, the audience, if they've done the 23andMe, what I want them to do is look at the portion of their ancestry report that says timetable. I believe it says the timetable, and you will see the Southeast Asian, Southeast African at the bottom, a little bit going up. Then you get that Native American, which are the Asian migrants. They term Native American. And then you will also see at the very end, that's when you get the Nigerian and the British and all of that. And that kind of that doesn't kind of, it lines up with what I was showing with Natural's DNA and looking at the chromosomes. I only learned how to look at the chromosomes because I understood the sequencing. But for those of you who have done the ancestry DNA, play with the chromosome painter, and you will notice for your West African markers, they will be either by themselves or they will be adjacent to one of the European DNA. I noticed that the Benin Togo will tend to be with the Irish, the Scottish. You may see it with the English. For the people who tend to get the Irish and the Scottish, you will find that the Benin Togo will often be linked up next to those markers because that's where a lot of people uh, get that from. I have a Montserrat. I will tell you this much. I have a Montserrat patient. He's a pure Montserrat, and I consider that DNA like gold. I interviewed him, and he gladly offered me his DNA sample. And because I had suspected for a long time that these matches to the Igbo people had nothing to do with the slave trade, but in fact was a marker of the blackamoors that were kicked out of the Celtic countries like Ireland and Scotland, because I noticed the pattern and the correlation with getting that mark, that DNA, Irish Scottish, along with the Igbo. The other thing too is I see people who literally know their lineage on both sides and who are quite indigenous. Either if they're not state tribal members, they are very related to the state tribal members. So they did not intermingle with any African slaves, and they can vouch for it, at least not on any significant level, and understand that for you to signal a tribe, okay, that means that many of those members came into your lineage. So they know that they did not intermingle with Africans, but they knew they intermingled with people from Ireland. They knew they intermingled with people from Scotland. So I started to notice this pattern, but I don't like to just have conjecture. I like proof. So I always wished I could get my hands on a Montserrat sample. Now, someone could say, well, why are you focusing on Montserrat? The reason why is if you understand that by 1700, 70% of the slave population in Montserrat was from Ireland, and that is a very chocolate island. It's quite small. If you look at the slave voyage data, you will see you could count on not even two hands the actual ships that went there. Okay, and that's it from Africa. All right. So this is the perfect population to genetically study. Their their national dish is goat water, which is a goat stew, which is a rendition of an Irish stew. Their slave rebellion was on St. Patrick's Day. I studied the Montserrat culture, and I asked many of them, people who are half Montserrat. This patient who literally just left Montserrat 4 years ago, I asked him, is there any loan words in his country or any cultural vestiges which are African? And he said the only thing that comes close to it is our carnival, and that's not African, that's from Europe. So when I did his DNA study, the first thing that popped out was Igbo. And then, of course, he had maybe a little over 10% European DNA, somewhere in that ballpark, and it localized his DNA to certain areas of Ireland. Now, what I'd like to tell you, listening audience, when you see those areas, like on 23andMe, like my uncle, the top city in his DNA, it says England, then afterwards is Bristol, and all of this. Those are the individuals in those areas who are now Caucasian, who are our distant relatives. And that serves as a stamp as to the location, as to where they took the Blackamoors from. So if you look at my mother and her brother's primary genetic pattern, the African DNA that came in, which is, the West African, that's the Moorish DNA, it is primarily of the North African type, meaning that it doesn't say North African, but the genetic pattern is they have high Senegambian DNA. And that doesn't surprise me because when you look at other DNA tests, we have matches. Those matches are matches to the Gambia, Algeria, and North Africa. And that tells me that the Moorish part of their lineage was primarily dominated by Iberian Moors. And I told you there was a large population of them in Great Britain. So it doesn't surprise me that the first match out of England that my uncle is matching to would be London, because where would migrants go to? The countryside or the city? They would be in the city. Now, a cousin of ours, when I look at her DNA, she gets Oyo and Igbo. Oyo is a subdivision of the Yoruba people. And if you look at her European DNA, her primary matches are to not Bristol is one, I don't have it in front of me, but it's actually the countrysides of England outside of London. And that goes along with the Oyo Yoruba DNA, because who would live in the countrysides of a place but people who were there for a long period of time? So you will see that these results all add up together. And if you look, you will see that there's an article that talked about in 7th century Kent, England, there's a girl called Up Down Girl. Your audience can Google it. She had 33% Isan Yoruba DNA, and the rest of her DNA was Northern European, and they linked it to her grandfather. And her grandfather would have been 100% Isan Yoruba, and this was in 7th century Kent, England, and he was said to be a noble. They didn't say who he was, but they said she was from a noble family. So understand that this Igbo DNA was very much in Ireland, Scotland. This Yoruba DNA was very much established in England as well. And this is why we also get those matches. But you have to also be aware that the Yoruba people also from ancient times had colonies in the Caribbean, in South America, and Central America. So, you have to be aware of that type of contact and ancient movement when you are interpreting DNA tests. So having these markers does not mean we are from there. It is understanding the relationship that our people had to other melanated people, and that is why we acquire those those results. I know I said a lot. I hope I didn't go over anybody's head.
Oh no, you didn't. You didn't at all. And again, I'm gonna rewatch this whole live just to go back and do a little bit more research on everything that you're saying.
Did you do 23andMe?
No, I did Ancestry.
Oh, okay. It would be, since you're open to doing DNA tests, it would be nice to do your 23andMe. And wherever they have developed such a large reference panel now, so they're more sophisticated with actually localizing where our European DNA is, and the value in that is not so much for just looking at it. The value is that it shows you where your Moorish ancestors came from.
Yeah. So that's when it comes down to DNA now, that's what I'm more interested in, just the Moorish side of
Mm-hmm.
I know they're gonna be disingenuous when it comes down to the indigenous side. I could clearly see that, but
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's like I said, it's more to our bloodline and to the audience. Just don't focus on your indigenous side. You got your family is very deep.
Oh yeah, and they'll have you believe your West African DNA is off of a boat from West Africa. It is not. The ships all came out of Europe, and they stopped on. Many of them stopped on the coast of Africa. But if you pay attention, they were strategic in the certain places that they stopped. In fact, the areas that they stopped were the areas called the established by the Atlantic Creoles. I encourage your listening audience to go to Wikipedia. They do a very good job of it. It's like 95% truth, 5% lies, but it still explains the formation of the Atlantic Creole Society with strategic areas along different coastal points on the African coastline, and the Pale Europeans established how could I say, relationships with those coastal Africans, creating mixed communities. And really, what they were doing was establishing a place where, when the ships left Bristol and those other ports, carrying the blackamoors and people, who left, during the Jacobite rebellion and all of those rebellions and wars that was happening in Europe, where they were uh, displacing our people from Europe, they sent them on ships, and these were stopping points. So you'll notice places like there's a place there in Nigeria, which is a common place, man, it's slipping my brain. It's on the coast, and a lot of times you will see it in Nigeria. Oh God, what is it called? That was a stopping point. And if you look at the people, hold on just 1 second.
While she's looking for the information, y'all, I see Engine, you're still stuck on the tooth thing. The tooth shoveling, and correct me if I'm wrong. That's when your teeth is curving, your two front teeth is curving, like it's like
Yes, and the bottom too, but it's more pronounced than the top teeth. Those are called the incisors.
right. Yeah, it's kind of curving like a shovel. You know what a shovel look like? It's kind of your teeth is not straight. It got a curve at the back of it. That's
Yeah,
Yes,
it's concave. It's
yes,
more concave in the back,
curve.
and other people's teeth more like flat in the back.
hmm that's what she's talking about. Now, majority of you that's in the audience that's melanated and you're from America, if you got a curve in your teeth, like mainly in the front and the back, I mean mainly the top and the bottom teeth, the front ones, that's a sign of one of the markers or signs that you're indigenous to the land, or what the doctor stated.
Okay, the area I was referencing was Calabar. I'm very sure a lot of your audience notices Calabar as a point where the boats left Calabar, Calabar. Well, if you look, Calabar was one of the regions that was one of these Atlantic Creole societies. And if you go in that region today, many of them have green eyes, and they'll tell you they don't know where it came from. Yeah, right. But in any case, if you look at the traditional dress of the men, you will see they have those tall top English hats, right? So understand that these were strategic points that was established with these African groups in certain areas. So these ships will have a place to stop on their journey to drop off blackamoors to the Caribbean and to the colonies. So basically, it was a coalition.
Right, right, right. And again, let me explain it to you, to some people again in the comments. I see that some of y'all's coming in while the doctor was talking about DNA and you're stuck on the African thing. I mean, you're gonna have to go back to get the understanding of what the doctor is talking about. I really don't want to recap it, but basically, it's really just a terminology issue. That's all it is. And if you want to understand this, please go back and just watch the point where at the point where we start talking about DNA sequencing, sorry. Sequencing, and you will basically get the understanding of it. It's kind of lengthy, but you're gonna get to understand it. So stop, please stop being discouraged, because I'm telling you, y'all, I just learned something today, and I'm pretty sure if you utilize your listening skills and your comprehension skills, you will be able to get the understanding. All right, all right. Sorry, doctor. You still there?
I'm here.
Just a few folks that still didn't understand. Um, all right. I guess that will wrap up the interview for for tonight. I hope in the future that we can have you on again and maybe perhaps do a part two to where we left off at.
hmm
Anything you want to say to the audience before we end it?
Well, I would encourage anyone that came in late, or if it's something they don't understand, to listen to the YouTube, or I don't know, you have this on TikTok or YouTube or both. They should listen to it again, and also do not run from DNA tests. Stop being intimidated of it, because I pick up there's a tendency for some of our people to say it's garbage, it's nonsense, and that's not really too smart of them, because if it's correctly identifying people who are from particular towns in Italy and to the exact town, understand that it's like any science, it improves and it continues to become on point. You can't continue to use these arguments, and we have an ancient lineage here, and it can be proven with these same tests. What they bank on is that we don't take the time to investigate why. And if you are ashamed of the results, or if you're ashamed of having African DNA or whatever issues therein, and you're denying it, you look like you hate yourself. So I'm saying that learn why the results are there. Why do we have that pattern? Yes, we are indigenous. Having African DNA only means we're the most ancient ones. African DNA is global. Everyone has it. It is just that the other DNA, the other people around the planet they have their DNA closed off in a genetic community. I'm kind of recapping. Our genetic communities are left open, especially if you're doing ancestry DNA, where they give you the genetic community. Instead of saying that your genetic community is indigenous American, which it really is, they'll tell you it's an African American community, and then give you all the components inside of it. And then you're looking at that, flipping out, saying, but then grandmama must have lied to me. No, she didn't. She didn't lie to you. You don't understand what it means. And it only means you are the oldest person on the planet, and it's not exclusive to the African continent. And yes, some markers did come from Africa. I explained about the Yoruba DNA. It could have come from Europe in the form of Moorish DNA. It could have been here from pre-Columbian times, because they did have colonies among us, particularly in the southern hemispheres. But the Senegal, the Gambian is new, and for the most part, it came with the European DNA in the Moors, and the Malian DNA that is used on the ancestry is pre-Columbian, and it came from mixing with North African ancient Berbers. So that's pretty much it.
All right. Hey, hey, Doc, I appreciate you coming up. Hey, Nine Ether, you got anything to say before she drop off?
Yeah, yeah. It was nice meeting you. It was nice having you on my brother's show. You know what I'm saying? I really learned a lot, you know what I'm saying, regarding this DNA matter, you know. And
Okay.
and you know the thing with the teeth too, you know, because I literally always wondered that too, like how come my teeth like just concave in like that. But I did learn a lot regarding this DNA matter, and I'm gonna rewatch it again also, so I can get some even more like better understanding regarding certain topics.
Hmm.
So once again, you know, thank you for coming on my brother's show.
Okay, you're very welcome. It was nice sharing my knowledge with the audience.
Thank you. And again, I hope I see you again. I'm gonna send you a message. Just I got a question for you. I ain't trying to say it on lot, but I do have a question. But I'll send it to you later on if you don't mind.
Okay, it's fine.
All right. Thank you for coming up.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
All right. Okay, people. I have we're trying to work on this other person that we're trying to interview. Apparently he's a geneticist that goes against the grain. His name is what correct me if I'm wrong, Ether. William Gilliland. That's him.
Yeah, yeah,
That's his name.
yeah.
He's
William Gilliland.
yeah, he's a associate professor. He's a genetics and PhD in biological science. Basically, he's not one of those disingenuous geneticists. He's I wouldn't say go against the grain, but he's honest. Let's say that he's more honest. We're working on getting this professor on this show so we can go in depth in genetics to prove that black people are original to this land. And hopefully something's gonna come up. Something's gonna happen because Miko already talked to him already. We got his number, we got his email. Hey, he the next one that we working on. He's the next one. Yes, he's Caucasian. Yes, he's Caucasian. I know how some of y'all feel about that, but shoot, any information helps to prove the claim, and we need these virtual records for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
so they can have the clips. They can say, "Well, this yada yada geneticist or this doctor said this. This is the direction that we're moving right now." Like yeah, we will still debate here and there, but we on the mission right now. And tonight was that proof that we're on the mission. No pushback, listening to everything what the doctor said until we get a full understanding. And the theory was correct. African, when they say African, they're not saying that you are African. They are saying basically you have ancient DNA. It's a terminology issue, but we know that so-called Africans are ancient people, and that's wherever the case. Everyone in the world has African DNA. It's just a placeholder for ancient DNA. That's what ancestry and all these people are actually doing, but they tricking the people with terminology. I don't understand why they're doing this. I don't know why won't they just be up front? And it's I don't know why I haven't thought about the Moorish mixing, like how they come here and okay, yeah, we know some of us came through the Moors, right? But I forgot that some of these Moors intermingled with Aboriginal Africans too.
Mhm.
I forgot that.
You know, it makes sense too because like all the Moors, they're known for like traveling everywhere. You know what I'm saying?
Yep,
So yeah, that made a whole lot of sense.
yep. But for me, until I find the person that comes from Africa, then I cannot claim to be a descendant of those people. But I thank the doctor for showing me how to properly understand DNA results. And I know people are still kind of confused. I know people still don't understand. That's why the live is recorded so you can go back and get the understanding. Cause she even said in the live, she said, I asked her, when people read the DNA results, are they reading it correctly? Is that the truth? She's like, no, they're ignorant. Basically, they're ignorant. They don't know
Yep.
what they're reading. That's what she said.
Yep, she said that, John.
Someone say, oh, I'm 30% Nigerian. She's basically saying you are full. That's basically what she's telling you. They don't, y'all, she literally said it like 3 or 4 times. Get your raw DNA data. There's a conflict of interest with these DNA companies. It's best to go everywhere because if you go everywhere, something, there's a little truth in everything. Like I said, there's a little truth somewhere and everywhere. You're going to find something. And we're, like I said, we're building the folders, we're building the lesson. Hell, we might make a book on it. Who knows? Man, Miko might come through with the book, you know what I'm saying? On this DNA shit. But I'm saying, like, we putting everything on the table. We're risking everything, technically putting our lives on the line. We got people hating us, wanna the threats, man, the threats, the craziness, the wickedness, the jealousy, and I don't understand why. It don't need to be no jealousy. It don't need to be no hate. We are really doing this for the people. If people want to donate, they can donate. People don't have to donate. You still gonna get information by the end of the day, right?
Yep.
So
I
fact.
like you know what I'm saying, I like how she brought out the fact that the indigenous people, we still the most ancient people on the planet. You know what I'm saying?
They're just saying the word African is just a placeholder for ancient. That's all.
Mhm.
Nothing more, nothing less. It doesn't mean you are from Africa, people. It's a terminology issue. That's all.
Yep.
She even broke down the newest race to the oldest race.
Yep.
She
She
broke it
broke all
down.
that down.
All right. So again, that was a real doctor we had on here. She studied genetics. She is not a geneticist, but she studied genetics and she talked to real geneticists. When she came, she didn't have to come. She's a very busy woman, literally. But thanks to Miko, thanks to the Most High, thanks to whatever divine being out there, or whatever y'all want to say, she said, I'm going to put everything aside and I'm going to come teach these people real quick. I don't even know this brother, but she came. And that's the beautiful thing of being the chosen one. That's the beautiful thing. All right. So we're gonna wrap this live up. My freaking back hurt, my thighs hurt for sitting in this freaking chair for 2 hours. But thank y'all for showing up. I appreciate it, y'all. On the TikTok side, I see y'all stayed over there. The same old people stay over there. I'm gonna say shout out all of y'all over there. Y'all did y'all thing and sat through the whole podcast, even though I told y'all to come to YouTube. But y'all like listening like a radio or something. I guess y'all driving. I guess y'all driving or something. But I appreciate y'all coming in and showing support, keeping everything positive. So thank y'all. Now for the end, the